All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our third closing corner with the very wonderful Kelly Evans. Kelly is a transaction coordinator. She's also an agent here with us at Choice, and she does a number of transactions each and every month. And I think as agents, we learn that the more we do, the more we know, and something new comes up every single transaction. And so that's the purpose of these sessions is to keep things front of mind, to learn from one another, and to really take tangible examples of things that are happening in real time so that we can implement them in our business, both proactively and preventatively. And so today we're going to talk through everything we can do to keep a transaction on track. And Kelly is going to share some real examples with us. She has a number of things that she's going to hit on, but at any point, if there are any questions that you have, please be sure to chime in. We do these sessions specifically for you and your transactions, and so we want to make sure it's a collaborative environment. Kelly, thanks so much for doing this today. I appreciate you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for giving up your time today. Let's see. I think I'll just jump right in. I really try to be really mindful of keeping it at an hour. Um, Shout out to all the Choice partners. I always get a little bit of help from Kara and Allie when I do these, just to solidify anything I'm sharing is accurate. Um, I thank you for the platform, being able to do this. I have the privilege of participating in multiple transactions. We don't know what we don't know until we realize we didn't know it. Um, I think being prepared and sharing expectations with clients will build some trust, that you know how to handle a transaction. Um, and then really, these are things I've learned the hard way. This is not my comfort zone to even do these sessions, but I would continue to see the same hiccups in transactions, and I realize it's just things we aren't taught. We're not taught during the real estate classes, um, and sometimes we don't learn them until we are in the middle of a transaction. Um, all right, so we'll keep it at an hour. I narrowed it down to 4 closing expectations for buyers and 4 for sellers. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and show you all 4 for seller and all 4 for buyers, just so you can make sure this is a good use of your time. I don't want to lose anybody on the call, obviously, but I do try to be mindful. If these are things you're seasoned in, then that's fantastic. But most of these examples are things that I've even just seen in the last, month or two. There are documents that your seller is going to have to hand sign with a notary, and those originals have to make it back to the closing attorney's office. And we'll go into more detail about all these in the next couple of slides. Explain to sellers that inspections are inconvenient. It's going to be best if they can vacate. If they can't vacate, if they work from home, completely understandable, but don't let the inspectors and the buyers walk in without realizing you're going to be there. Just have the conversation. Property taxes, HOA dues, and mortgage days interest are things that are going to be collected on that Alta statement. And Stacy, maybe you learned this on your transaction, that sometimes will blindside the sellers. They're just those little bitty fees that they either weren't expecting. And I think if we can explain it ahead of time, they're going to be a little calmer when they first view it. And then setting the disconnect for utilities for the day after closing is a good practice. And we can talk about why. And these are the buyer closing expectations. Tell buyers they must attend closing in person for about an hour. Make sure the closing date works for them. Mail away and POAs are options, but they have their own hurdles. And we did go into detail with these on the last closing corner, so we probably won't have time to go over them today. It's best not to plan for the moving truck on closing day. We can talk about why. They also should not have pods or U-Hauls on the property until it records. Scheduling inspections as much as possible on the same day as a courtesy to sellers and to protect your time. And then due diligence date is ours to keep track of. It's not the lender or the attorney. And make sure the buyer doesn't hold off ordering the appraisal while they're waiting for inspections or repairs. So those are the topics. And I hope these are things you wouldn't mind diving into a little deeper. And I'm going to fix my camera here because I think that works. All right. So sellers have to hand sign documents in front of a notary. Don't let your sellers leave the country, especially leave the country, without handling their seller docs and deed packet with the closing attorney. If they leave the state, try to handle before they leave. Sellers can do what's quote unquote a mail away much easier than a buyer. A buyer mail away is completely its own animal. A seller mail away means that the seller can sign in another state in our country with a notary, and then those originals can come back to the attorney's office. It just requires a notary, overnight mail, um, but it just requires time and attention. This is not something you want to do the week of closing. So if you know your sellers are getting ready to move pretty quickly, just ask the closing attorney, hey, my sellers are leaving actually in a week. Is there anything we can do here before they leave town? And the attorney will walk you through some options. Also, if one spouse is going to be moving, a lot of times one spouse will leave while one spouse stays here. You can have the power of attorney discussion with the closing attorney. Again, POA for seller is much easier than POA for buyer. That is a whole nother thing. Power of attorney for one spouse to another spouse for a selling transaction um, is usually doable. And then the only thing that the sellers can e-sign as part of a closing transaction is that final Alta and closing CD. It's a big misconception, and also an assumption from a lot of sellers that they can just electronically sign everything for closing, and unfortunately they cannot. They can e-sign that final Alta statement. Any questions on this?
I just wanted to chime in real quick. I think Brian has done a daily video on this before, but just to kind of underline it, although there are things that sellers can e-sign, we always recommend that for any of those things that you also get um, either a Loom video to them and preferably like something in your dot loop also verifying that they completely have read what they are signing. And so if you're having them sign something that has some numbers on it, then making sure that you send them a video explaining where every single thing is and then having it in your dot loop, even if they are also electronically signing it with the attorney, or especially if they're doing a POA, making sure that they have signed saying that they understand where everything is. We just want to double check all of our wires to make sure that there can be no miscommunication on where numbers are, especially.
Definitely. So inspections and access. So this is sellers. Inspections are inconvenient, and it is really best if the sellers can vacate. If they're staying home, let everyone know. Um, and then also telling them that inspections and contractor visits can occur after the due diligence date, all the way up through closing date. Reasonable access, that's open to interpretation. Um, but just setting that expectation for sellers ahead of time is going to be helpful. Remind them that if they move away, that they still have to keep those utilities on all the way through closing date. I like to tell sellers to set the expectation for inspections is to say, also, could you kindly make sure that there's access to the electrical panel, water heater, unlock your crawl space. It helps if all the light bulbs are working, because if they're not, that inspection report's going to come back with electrical problem, electrical problem. It's probably just a light bulb. Also have them light the pilot light in their gas fireplace. That comes up a lot too. And then telling them about radon being left behind for 2 to 3 days. Um, that way they understand that it's going to be there and that there's going to be a follow-up pickup visit. I also like to tell sellers in my email, sort of setting these expectations, is this could be the last time that these buyers are in this home until closing day. And it's just a courtesy to give them that time, let them speak freely with their inspector. We get that there are sellers that won't leave or cannot leave. And that's understandable. It is their home. But telling the buyer's agent, hey, just want to give you a heads up, the seller's going to be there. If they work from home, maybe the seller can let the inspector know what room they're in. Hey, can you start in this room? If you could do this room first, I'm gonna close the door. I'll stay in here the rest of the day. But you would be so surprised how many people just have to stumble through this in front of each other during the inspection visit, ask questions, and set expectations. This is just a little blurb on the offer that's sometimes you have to point out to sellers that says that they need to allow access, reasonable access. All right, so HOA dues, taxes, and the property mortgage payoff. So this is a lot in one slide. We're going to go through each one separately. I have this on every seller welcome letter. I tell them about property taxes. I tell them that it's going to be collected on a calendar year basis. So I don't know if you want to take a photo of it and then you can voice it into ChatGPT later and put it in your own format. Um, but I just figured I would just put all this up here. Property taxes, I let them know the HOA dues, that there are likely going to be transfer fees and HomeWise doc fees. That we do our best to try to find these fees, but HOAs are not transparent in their fees. You're going to find that out the more transactions you do. And then the mortgage payoff. So sellers think they know what they owe. They can look at an app on their phone and see the amount. And come closing day, they're going to say, why are they collecting more money? And we can tell them they collect 4 to 7 days interest along with their mortgage payoff. That is usually refunded with their escrow money. Any taxes and insurance that are in their escrow account, any overage that was paid collecting these days interest will come back to them as well. But I like to make these things clear because none of these are really negotiable once you're at that table or the day before closing when they're looking at this document. Um, and it seems these three things seem to cause sellers the most headache. So property taxes. They are going to be paid on a prorated basis for the calendar year per the North Carolina offer. So at the closing, the attorney is going to prorate for the time each person is occupying the home for the calendar year, regardless that taxes are collected from July to June. This split is not negotiable, and I underline at the closing table because personally, I've never seen it negotiated. But where it's listed in the offer to purchase, it does say unless otherwise agreed. So I suppose that's open to negotiation, but it's not going to be something you're going to do when you're at the closing table. Sellers are not going to sit there and say, I'm not paying this. I already paid my taxes. Um, this is a really helpful one to point out to sellers in the beginning. Because what happens with sellers at closing is they're using an attorney that belongs to the buyer. There's a level of distrust sometimes where they're not sure that this attorney is, you know, doing their fees correctly. So if you get ahead of it and you're like, yeah, remember when I told you at the beginning they were going to collect these extra, or at the beginning that this is how the property taxes are going to be prorated, it will help. Um, Buyers and sellers pay for the calendar days that they own the home. Get advice from the attorney if you need it. Um, but this one will cause problems if sellers feel like they've already paid their property taxes. Any thoughts or comments?
We have a question in the chat, Kelly, and just pause us if that's something you're going to get to in a second. But just talking about when the buyer finds out the taxes increased and didn't know until they got the tax bill, who's responsible if the tax was not calculated correctly?
This is after they've closed.
Yeah.
Um, the new buyer probably, but I would probably have probably a tiny bit out of my lane. Um, the attorney does their best because that will happen with new construction, and sometimes the attorney has to sort of do their best to guesstimate um, if it's not a bill that's ready to be paid. That's unfortunate for that buyer though.
Yeah,
Um,
Sue, and I would definitely ask like a closing attorney just for clarification. But I do think, like Kelly said, generally that responsibility would then fall on the buyer because I think the assumption is that the taxes are prorated based on the current rate and current estimates. And so, just with everything, once you close, you're closed. And so kind of everything wraps up at that point would be my assumption.
That's right. That's the one gift that the sellers get from closing is they're done. The sellers are they've paid their what and you, the closing attorney is responsible for making sure that happens that way. Um, but this would be the split here. So if they were closing on the 11th, the seller pays from January and they pay the day of closing, and then the buyer would pay for the 12th through the end of the calendar year. And this is what it would look like on the Alta statement. The buyer they would be collecting for them, and over here they would be collecting for the seller, and then the attorney will pay the property tax bill. And I think this is a good, okay, perfect. So this is a cheat sheet that I have, and I think, okay, good, it's in the chat. And I ran this by Kara too. I said, this is the one I use when sellers, I don't usually send this to sellers unless it's a seller that just has a lot of questions that you're like, I need to give him all the information, him or her all the information so that they trust this process. And I shared this with Kara and said, this is what I use. Do you like this document? Does Sterling have a better document? And she said, this document's fine. She was thrilled that this was a topic today too, because she says that it does cause a lot of problems at closing for sellers if they were not expecting to pay their portion of the calendar year taxes. Any questions? Did I miss anything else in the chat? We'll move on to HOA dues. So I don't know if you guys have had this experience yet, but you get to that closing table and there are surprise HOA dues. Usually for the seller, sometimes for the buyer. But for the seller, they'll charge them transfer fees. Sometimes that HOA will charge HomeWise docs and any company that they're using to do the transfer fees. And those fees could be $95, $350. There's no way to know. And I try to tell sellers up front, if this is really important to you, then you should call your HOA. You're their client. You probably have a pretty good person that you could probably talk to at your HOA. Ask them. We do our best. We call, we ask for fees and dues and transfer fees, but until that attorney orders the transfer from the HOA, suddenly all these fees start showing up. So I like to get ahead of this too and just go, yeah, remember I mentioned on the welcome letter that if there's a chance there will be some other transfer fees. And then mortgage payoff. So on the Alta statement, when they have the mortgage payoff section here, it's right here. You'll see whatever day's interest they're collecting. So if your seller looks at the Alta statement and sees this 499 number and they looked at their phone yesterday on the app, and that's more, just point out here, they're going to collect 5 days interest. And if they ask you why, I Googled it. I like to Google exactly what I think they're going to Google so that I make sure I'm like, this is what they're going to find. This is what I'm going to say. So I kind of keep this blurb with me. But it's just standard practice. They'll collect extra days interest because when the attorney pays off the mortgage and either wires the money or sends the check, if closing doesn't happen that day or recording didn't happen that day, then they may need a couple extra days interest to cover the mortgage. So that's really what I just sort of say. It's just their way in case there's a day delay, if it takes time for the final payment to be received and processed, and that the payment statement is time sensitive and includes additional interest, which is calculated based on your daily rate. So really out of our lane to calculate it, but just preparing them that they're going to collect this on the closing statement. And it's just going to help lend itself to a little more, sellers will be they'll expect it instead of feeling like the attorney is adding extra fees here and there. Any questions on those payoff options, those payoff? And then we'll just real quick talk about the utilities. So I don't know if you guys have had this experience yet, but setting the expectations for sellers to disconnect their utilities effective the day after closing is best practice. And I get when it's a Friday closing or, sellers just do whatever they want to do. But if you can set the expectation, it's ideal if you can disconnect day after closing because sellers are supposed to keep their utilities on through closing time. Um, the utilities need to be on for the final walkthrough. If the utilities were disconnected the day of closing and the buyers forget to connect, which happens a lot, it's the seller's home that's going to suffer. So if there's we've had one where ice was in the freezer, it melted, and then it ruined the hardwood floors. 100-degree weather, utilities went off. I was there at a home picking up staging stuff for our sellers, and the garage was open and the power went out. So the garage was open, power was out, it was 95 degrees outside. Closing wasn't until about 2 o'clock that afternoon. And the buyer happened to roll up for the final walkthrough with the buyer's agent. And I said to the buyer's agent, "Hey, power just went out. Did your buyer connect utilities?" And the buyer was like, "Oh, I totally forgot." But guess what? It's the seller's house that's suffering right now. It's the seller's home. It's their homeowner's insurance. And that's really why I tell them, I'm like, I promise, just pay an extra day or two utilities just to be sure um, that the buyers connect. Because if they forget, you don't want it to be your problem. So that's just a little piece I like to try to mention.
I just want to throw in here also, like, that's why not doing a closing on a Friday, among so many reasons, like, Friday closings are just best avoided if possible. Like, aim for Wednesday or Thursday, because then if it gets delayed, it's by one day. It's not too big of a deal for numbers to be changed. It's not too big of a deal for utilities and things like that. For sure. And then also, I mean, as silly as it sounds, obviously, this is more so a buyer thing, but if they're able to take over the utilities instead of having to like stop and completely restart, a lot of times there's like a startup fee for when a utility has been completely turned off. And so if you can have them avoid that $150 like turn on fee, that can also just be nice.
Is that for all towns? Is that like,
No, it's just been situational and I've experienced it as like a tenant before as well. And I'm like, ah,
got
if I'd
it?
known, it can just be helpful.
Might need to get a little more research on that then, how to make that easier and less expensive for buyers. All right. And then I just put this in here, but I really wish that utilities were part of MLS. I don't know if you know this, but the Fayetteville MLS, it's in there. It's like they have to enter it. They have to enter the utility information. Or I wish it was part of our pods. But I really love when listing agents put the utility list in with MLS docs. It's so helpful. And just remember that a new buyer's agent or a sometimes agent genuinely may forget to give that buyer a utility list. Sometimes it just isn't part of their process. So I
Sorry,
think
I want
that's
to
it for
chime in
this
with
section.
one more
Yeah.
thing here.
Yeah.
Real reports, it was something we talked about on our AI call recently, but it's one of the platforms that Dorify has added as one of the little tabs on their homepage. It's signified by like just two lowercase r's. In the reports that are free, they will include a list of all of the utilities, including average utility bills in that area, the best like internet provider and best cell phone coverage. So ideally, you're getting this information from the sellers, but just know as a buyer's agent, it's also really helpful as a resource for your people to pull info from there too.
That is awesome. I did not know that. Thank you. And then just in case, again, in case your seller doubts you and Googles it, it does actually say in North Carolina, when should sellers disconnect? And it does say the day after closing. We always have to assume our client might be Googling behind our back. Any questions or stories or seller expectations before we move into buyers? All right, buyer side. Helping buyers understand they need to attend closing is a easy assumption. Buyers have e-signed everything up to this point. They have e-signed their loan docs, they have e-signed your buyer agency documents. Sometimes nobody really thinks to tell them you have to sign in person with a pen at the closing attorney's office. Mail away is an option, but really has its own hurdles. It's not an easy process, requires some time, and we did go over it in detail at the last closing corner session. Um, I think explaining to buyers why why a moving truck arriving on closing day is not good practice. We'll go into detail on that. Scheduling inspections as much as possible on the same day, and about due diligence date. All right, so confirm the date works well for them in advance when you're filling out that offer to purchase. And that's really it. I think we sort of touched everything. Just setting the expectation for the buyer that they need to be present. I do it in my welcome letter, and you'd be surprised how many of them write back and go, "Oh, I didn't know I needed to actually be there." Yes, you both need to be there if there's two of you. Um, if it needs to be a mail away or a POA option, then talk that through immediately. POAs have to be approved by the lender, and they may not. And mailaways affect the settlement date and the funding date and require extra steps and require some time. All right, so moving truck arriving on closing day. It's not usually ideal, nor should they have pods or U-Hauls delivered until it records. That has happened more times than I care to think about. Um, and then also just telling them that scheduling vendors and appliance delivery on that closing day may not be the best idea either. And we can talk about why. We can sort of go through what a real closing day timeline looks like, because at the end of the day, we cannot confirm or guarantee what time it's going to record. That is, this is one day where there's so many pieces really outside of our control. We can explain how things will work so that they can make an informed decision on how they want to move forward with their moving plans. So on a typical closing day, that buyer, so we'll assume it's a 9 a.m. closing. That buyer is going to sit at the table maybe an hour to they're going to sign their loan package. Some lenders won't send their funds until they have reviewed that loan package that was just signed at the table. Now, movement mortgage, on most of their loan types, they fund in the morning. So you show up for closing, that lender movement has funded, will have funded. So you're not waiting for those funds to come in. But if it's a lender where the funds are not there, and it is about half of them, they don't send funds until they review that loan package that was just signed at the table. So they sign at the table, and then the attorney has to send it back to the closing department. The closing department's going to review it. We don't know how long that's going to take. And then once they review it and they give it the thumbs up, then they're going to push that button to send the rest of the funds to the closing attorney. That's a piece we don't know. We don't know how long it could be. It could take several hours, depends on the lender. And then we also have to wait for the buyer's money to roll in. So their cash to close funds have to show up at the attorney's office too. Ideally, they would have wired it the day before, and it's there when they walk into closing. It could have come from a retirement account, and all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, it needs 3 days. This is a piece also to warn buyers about ahead of time. You're going to wire funds for closing. Take a minute to check with your institution to see how long it takes to wire funds, especially if it's a retirement account. I had one where it was like a pension account, had no idea it was going to be 5 business days. Luckily, we had gotten ahead of it though. So we don't know how busy the lender's closing department is. We don't know how busy the registered deeds office is that day. It could be a Friday, end of the month. Um, and then, so we can never guarantee what time it's going to record. If if a buyer really pushes and my feet are held to the fire and I have to say, how long do you think it would be before I would get keys? I usually maybe will say a minimum 3 hours from the time you signed. Um, But again, it's a Friday. It could be busy. We just don't know. It could be a lender. There are lenders that don't fund USAA or I think it was USAA. One of them, they only fund 4 times a day. So you don't know when those funds are coming. And then lastly, truly, when you are the buyer's agent, and you do that final walkthrough, and sometimes your only leverage with that seller is refusing to close until something is handled or repaired or personal property's left behind. And if you have a moving truck that's waiting, you're going to accept the property the way it is because at that moment you don't feel like you have a choice. So I get that buyers need to schedule their moving truck and maybe they don't have a choice but to show up that day, and that's fine. But just let them know this is how the day may work. So if we have this 9 o'clock closing, I mean, maybe you could have the movers come afternoon 1, 2 would be safest, but I still can't guarantee that it would be recorded, and that you would legally be able to have keys and enter the property. Has anybody had any day moving day stories like this where the truck's waiting and you're waiting at the attorney's office? You will.
I had some buyers that were selling their personal home and then closing on new construction, and the closing of their sale was just taking forever. And so we had to have kind of that continued conversation of like, I know you're so excited to get in there and you were planning on having your moving truck today, but we might have to look at, you know, having you stay at a hotel for a night or something. And I mean, it was something we had talked about before, especially contingent closings are just so tricky. And thankfully, we had timed it up so that our sell side closing would be first thing in the morning, and then our buy side closing was at like 2 or 3 p.m. just to try to, probably 2 p.m. because I'm like, we want to try to record by 3 or 4, you know. But it was still getting tight, and that's just an awkward conversation to have because they're so excited, and you don't want to be the bearer of bad news, and it's not your fault, but it sounds like it's your fault. And yeah, anyway, been
I
there.
didn't even consider the domino effect. I didn't even consider that you're also waiting for something to close your previous sale to close before you can buy. Wendy, did you have your hand up? Nope, maybe that was an
I did
accident.
not mean to. I'm
Oh,
looking around and I must have mistakenly done it.
that's all right.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. I was hoping for an awesome question.
No, I just had a very delayed closing, so I have PTSD from it.
It, I mean, and that's really why I do these sessions, because PTSD in real estate's real. Once it happens to you once, you're like, I do not want to feel this way again. I do not want to let this happen again. I'm going to make sure that I start setting that expectation. So that's really it. I don't want everybody to learn everything the hard way, like I did. I've learned everything the hard way. All right. I asked ChatGPT to put this into an illustration. This is what they gave me. But we went through it. You sit at the table, you just things take time. The lender may review that whole package. We have to wait for the buyer's funds. We have to wait for the lender to send their money and review the loan package. It could be really busy at the Register of Deeds. We all it's not all Wake County. There are lots of counties around here, and the Register of Deeds offices work very differently. Um, and then yeah, movers don't want to wait. And having that pod and U-Haul on the driveway is also not technically allowed until it's recorded. All right, so buyers with inspections. So buyers trying to arrange inspections and any vendor visits on the same day or window of days. So if you haven't yet, you may have a buyer that goes rogue, and they schedule everything. All of a sudden you have found out that they have scheduled their own inspector, they've scheduled their own roofing company, their own HVAC people, and then they also want flooring and painters to all come in. And the next thing you know, they have scheduled all these people on 5 different days. So get ahead of it and just say, hey, I know you're going to schedule these things. How about we try to aim for these 2 days? It's courteous to the seller's time if it's occupied. And then you as the agent, since you need to be present for all of these inspections and vendor visits, it protects your time too. So get ahead of it before they start making phone calls. Um, and then also be mindful of ring doorbells and speaking in front of the ring doorbells. And then also just being thoughtful about vendors that are traipsing in and out of this home where, they're talking about doing is knocking things down and redoing. And sometimes it's hard on the sellers when they've loved this home for 30 years.
And about the vendors and people going in and out, I've certainly been in situations. I'm thinking of like a water in the crawl space type thing where one of my buyers was like, well, I'm going to get three different quotes from people, obviously with the intention of seeing who can give me the highest quote because that'll give me the most leverage to try to get some money out of the sellers, right? And while we do want to support our clients in making sure they feel comfortable and confident and that they've done their own research, at the same time, to your point, like being courteous of the sellers and allowing availability within like reason. After a certain point, even though they were all on the same day, after a certain point, you're kind of like, yeah, we might be kind of undermining ourselves by annoying them simply with having so many people out to their property, though. So, like, yes, we definitely, first of all, just because the number is higher doesn't mean they have to give us anything more. But also, just the courtesy goes a long way in terms of negotiations down the road, too.
Absolutely. 100%. And again, that's why these sessions aren't rules. These are really more courtesy, and just things that we learn along the way and getting ahead of it, setting the expectation. I overuse that word expectation, but boy, sometimes there's no better word. And then I guess this is really more so when a home inspector is they only schedule in showing time to get the lockbox code. It's not the job of the home inspector to give notice to that homeowner. So if you're scheduling inspections for your buyer, let the listing agent know right away so that they can let the sellers know right away. Don't assume that that inspector is going to go and immediately schedule that in showing time because they may not. Because I've had that happen and they scheduled the night before and nobody told the sellers and they were not ready for inspections that day. Um, and then I also like to, when I schedule the inspections, I like to put a little note to the listing agent that says, hey, these are our inspections. Also, we kindly request that the utilities are on, crawl space unlocked, easy access to water heater, electrical panel, items moved away from the garage for termite inspection. Because if those things aren't done and the inspector can't adequately do an inspection and they charge to go back out, I kind of like that we had this piece. We said, we did ask for the utilities to be on. It literally just happened. Um, and then if you're the listing agent, let your sellers know about the inspections right away too and set expectations. Don't wait for the inspector to schedule in showing time. Any questions on inspections? Fun stories? So due diligence date and appraisal. Due diligence date, we're going to pretend that this is like the old times where there was a due diligence date and EMD really mattered. And I feel like that's coming again. That's going to be maybe how the offers are going to play out in the near future. But it's our responsibility as agents to keep track of that due diligence expiration date. It's not the lender. The lender and attorney, it's not even on their radar. So assume in this situation you have a DD fee that's $1,500 and you have a pretty hefty EMD fee, $7,500. You want to make sure all the repairs are negotiated and signed before that date. And then also don't let your buyer delay ordering the appraisal while you're waiting for inspections. I just had a buyer do this. I contacted the lender and said, hey, can you tell me if the appraisal status? And he's like, oh, buyer hasn't paid for it yet. He's waiting on the inspection results. And I'm looking at the timeline and I'm like, well, that's not going to work because if that price isn't right, we're past due diligence date and we've lost the ability to renegotiate the purchase price before due diligence expiration. So sometimes buyers don't understand that. So you hope you have a good relationship with the lender. Sometimes we don't. At a minimum, just an email that just says, "Can you give me appraisal status?" You hope they can at least fill you in. Um, but I literally just had this happen. And then also asking the lender for the status before the due diligence expiration, and then also asking them if the loan looks good. Because if you have a big EMD fee that's non-refundable, you're you're lessening your ability to negotiate with the sellers. There probably won't be any more negotiating with the sellers. And if you need to extend the closing date for whatever reason, you want to make sure you have time to do that before DD expires too. Um, Lenders, some especially out of state lenders, like they're just not paying attention. They're not paying attention to our DD date. They're not paying attention to the amount of earnest money that's on the line. And I've had it happen where they're like, you know what? As a matter of fact, we're waiting on we're going to need a pay stub from this particular work, whatever date. Can we bump the closing out? I'm like, well, I'll try. Um, so you want to make sure you have the ability to negotiate anything prior to due diligence expiration. That's repairs, purchase price, and maybe even the date. That's really it today, y'all. We busted right through that.
Thank you so much for doing these, Kelly. Anytime you do them, I'm like, gotta add this to a buyer packet, gotta add this to a seller's packet, you know. But especially the appraisal thing, there's a lot of things that I think are great pullouts, but that's something that I always try to hit on in my buyer presentations, like from the start, the first time I'm meeting with them, because I think that's such a common misunderstanding. And also, when we're talking about what the funds are going to be that they have to pay out of pocket up front, and we're talking about appraisals and we're talking about inspections, and they're like, well, what if these findings come back and they scare me? Like, can I wait? Like, it's an understandable thought process, and at the same time it's just not realistic, especially considering how long it takes from the time that you order to actually getting an appraisal back. It's normally about 2 weeks. Like, it is going to be pretty much right on the line of getting our appraisal back before due diligence ends if we order it like right when we go under contract. So yeah, all good stuff.
Yep.
You guys have any questions? I know she already asked, but there's so much. Stacy, what you got?
I have a really simple question just because I'm walking through this first closing on the list side. When do we officially list it as a closed transaction? Once it's recorded and we get that notification, not anytime before, even if the buyer signed at 10, we wait till it's recorded, correct? Okay.
Mhm.
Just want to make
Yep.
sure.
Wait until it's recorded, and ideally when you've seen the deed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, perfect. And then the attorney sends us the fully signed Alta because I only have the seller's side. So to
Yep.
upload that to Dotloop. Okay.
Yep. The attorney should send you the fully signed Alta statement signed by the buyers and the sellers. They don't normally send the deed to the sellers. They'll send the deed to the buyers. But they will tell you when it's been recorded.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Before we hop off, there was one thing I was supposed to chime in about during the inspection topic because Brian wanted us to hit on it and he wasn't able to be here, which is just as a reminder, I know we would never pass along access information, and I know Kelly mentioned this, but just so that we like triple underline it, if your clients are going to be at an inspection, you as the agent have to be there. You cannot just let them meet the inspector there. The inspector can get into the home if he has MLS access, but we as a buyer's agent, if he does not have MLS access, he or she, we can't pass along that access info. I know that's what you already said, Kelly, but just so that it's like mentioned a number of times, if our clients are going to be at the property, even if they're going to be standing in the front yard, right? Like even if that time does not work for you and they're like, well, we'll just not even go into the house. They are on the property. Someone that is licensed has to be there with them. And so that might mean that either you move the inspection time and date or you coordinate with a colleague, a fellow agent who is licensed to go out and meet them, right? So just wanted to make sure that was very clear. Brian will probably do a video on it.
And actually, now that you mention that, when we were talking about buyer expectations and, sort of getting them to schedule everything on 1 or 2 days, the other expectation to set with them is that you don't need to be there for 3 hours. None of you need to be there for 3 hours. So and I try to say, like, the inspector's going to start at 8 a.m. They prefer a solo head start. Let's plan on meeting at this time. And it depends on how big the house is. The rule that I had gotten from an inspector once was 1 hour per 1,000 square feet. So I kind of keep that in the back in my head. But
See,
yeah,
we'll go
setting that
through a lot.
expectation of like, let's just spend an hour there together. We protect your time.
Yeah, I always tell them, like, let's go for the last 30 minutes or so. And then if they push back, I'm like, I choose my words wisely, but kind of the underlying message is like, do you work best when someone is hovering over your shoulder? No, like we want them to focus on what they're there for. And I don't know about you, but I don't know. Like most of the things that they're looking for, I wouldn't know if we were looking right at it. So us being there with him isn't gonna help. Like let's show up for the part where he's seen everything and then he can tell us what he's seen and he'll give, he'll talk about what will be in the report. He'll also talk about what the difference is between how it's worded in that report and whether it's something we really need to be concerned about or whether it's just verbiage that's kind of standard and is more of just like a for your information.
Yes, I'm actually bummed that I didn't think to put that in the section about just being there for the summary. Because yeah, he's going to be taking photos. We don't need to distract them. And, they're just going to flush toilets and run water. And a couple of inspectors recently, I've noticed when they send the notification to the buyer, it says inspection time and then meeting time. So like even the inspectors are trying to help us set the expectation too, for us and for them.
And our inspectors are there to work for us even past the inspection. So just knowing that if we forget to ask a question or if we see that inspection, even though we've talked about it and we're confused, like you have hired them, they are here to work for you. And so we can always call them back and get some further clarification. Stacy put in the chat, Kelly, would you be open to sharing the letter that you send to buyers and sellers?
There's so many. There really are, and the templates will really vary. It really,
I think more like the opening where I think you referenced it a lot in the beginning of this call, like what's your welcome email or opening email
yeah.
listings. Or I'll
I
just hire you and I don't need to worry about it. It's fine.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
We'll
yeah,
just
yeah,
do
yeah.
that. Let's do that.
It's
Never mind.
it's really, it really just depends. Um, the blurb that I gave with the HOA dues and everything like that, but really, it really is just, I'm really usually just sort of announcing dates, making them aware of the dates that are ahead. I like to set that expectation about inspections, about, if it's best to vacate for 3 hours. It's a courtesy to the buyers, since this may be the last time they're in the home. Um, and then I think that's it. It will really just, it depends. If they don't live there, it's a different template than if they live there. So yeah.
And then if you go into Suite Assist and you go into Office Docs, and then up at the top, there's resources for buyers, resources for sellers, and then resources for agents. I did upload some email templates that I used to send buyers and sellers. Obviously, they need to be updated, and it doesn't include nearly as much information as what Kelly was talking about, but I did try to put in there like first step is to get our checks situated, and then here are the dates, and like try to kind of go over some of that. So maybe check that out, use it as a jumping off point, take some screenshots from Kelly's presentation, pop it all in ChatGPT. Combine. Yeah.
There are some
Anyone
good
else got anything? All right, y'all. Well, as with always, we are all here to be a resource to you. So if we hop off of here and you think, oh, there was that one thing I meant to mention, just send us an email. We're always happy to be there for you and answer any questions that you have. Kelly, thank you so much for doing this with us today. You are such a wealth of knowledge. If you are curious about what it would look like to hire a TC, feel free to reach out to her. We were talking about this before the call started, but I think when it comes to hiring and outsourcing, we always think that we need to have some grand plan of what this is going to look like for the entirety of our business. And while that is great, when it comes to working with a transaction coordinator, one of the best things is that you can start by just doing one deal together. And so just know if it's something you've been considering, like why not try it for one deal? Kelly is amazing. She works with a lot of agents. So if you're not sure how that handoff will go, she'd be more than happy to kind of help make that seamless for you. In the meantime, have a wonderful day. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Bye.